All right, good morning, everybody. Dr. Gunyon here. We're going to go over this week's live Q&A, and what I'm talking about here today is about adrenals and how that reflects and affects hormones. We'll definitely be covering what are signs and symptoms of adrenal issues. We'll go over some medications that you got to watch out for that are common medications that are used to treat symptoms of adrenal dysfunction. But it doesn't sound like adrenal dysfunction when you're taking it. The other thing we'll talk about is like what are the most important lifestyle changes that you can make right now, that you really got to focus on, that you can change like today. You can change those things today that start to support your adrenals, and then therefore start to make an impact on your health immediately. And that's a big intention of why I do these Q&As, is to help educate everybody, that I believe that everyone needs to be their own doctor, and that because ultimately you're responsible for your health, and so you have to become your own doctor, meaning like you got to know what choices to make. You got to have different perspectives. That we keep basically viewing and managing health the same way over and over again, which is a medical approach of treatment, and that's even done in a natural world. There's lots of natural treatments that aren't addressing the causes, they're just masking and treating the symptoms. And so we need to understand those differences so we don't head down a path where we think that we're healthy and we're doing maybe really good healthy behaviors, maybe like the exercise and eating well, but then we still hit a dead end because it wasn't specific enough. We had a poor perspective. And the reason I have such a sensitivity to that really is because that was me. That was my wife. When she got sick, we knew a ton about health, but because of the lack of specificity, meaning like we didn't know what was going on the inside. And that's why how I got into functional medicine is, and one of the purpose of functional medicine should be to investigate root causes through advanced functional medicine testing. And those are the things that you can uncover that you may not feel or know is there. I think one of the huge health principles that we keep making mistakes about when it comes to health is basing health off of how we look and how we feel. Health is not how we look or how we feel. You can have stage 4 cancer and not feel it. You can have a heart attack today and have no signs of heart problems yesterday, leading up till today. And so those are two of the biggest killers that we have. And so clearly we can't base health off of how we look and how we feel. If two of the biggest killers we may not feel until it's the very end, right? So we've got to break these patterns. We got to think differently. And that's, again, the intention of doing these live Q&As and getting information out there. And I just have a unique experience around it, going through our own tragedies, health experiences, testimonies that led us to truth. And that's what I want to bring to everybody. So with that said, we're going to talk about adrenals again and hormones. And so what are those adrenals? The adrenals are the small glands that sit on top of your kidneys. Okay. And they produce hormones. The hormones that a lot of people hear of is like cortisol, DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone. And then it's also things like adrenaline. And another name for adrenaline is also epinephrine. So those are some of the hormones that are being made there, and they're really important. I hear people say, "Well, I heard that cortisol is bad or whatever." And it's like your body's producing this cortisol to help with different mechanisms that are happening in your body. It's not a bad hormone. It's just about if you keep triggering it, you keep triggering the response. And we got to talk about what those triggers mean today. And so these hormones, what they do is they regulate your stress levels, they regulate your blood sugar. Okay, this is a big one. And then also your blood pressure. It's the adrenals. What you'll also hear is it's called the HPA axis. Now, what that stands for is called hypothalamus, which is part of your brain, pituitary, which is a gland in your brain. And then also the axis means that it's the communication between the brain, the glands, and the rest of the body. And so that's a very important point, is that our body, all the parts are working together. They're not compartmentalized. And see, in medicine, again, or in our traditional medical approaches, it's all compartmentalized. Like, and there's a purpose for that. If like you have a major heart problem, you don't go to like a podiatrist, right? That podiatrist is specializing in feet. The cardiologist is specializing in heart. And that's definitely important. But that they also have they concentrate their focus there and not how things are connected, right? Because like think about that, using that example right there. Like I could hit your big toe with a hammer, your blood pressure goes up. That's not a heart problem. You can stress out, your blood pressure goes up. That's not a heart problem. You can eat caffeine and your blood pressure goes up, it's not a heart problem, right? But if you go to a cardiologist and your blood pressure is up, they're going to say you have a heart problem, but it was actually triggered by some other part of your body, right? And what you were doing in your lifestyle. So you've got to understand everything's connected, and that's what the axis mean, HPA axis, brain body connection, basically. And I'm not going to go into all those details. However, just want you to know that they're all connected, right? So when we start to talk about these adrenals, remember that our bodies are going to be triggered through three stressors: physical, chemical, and emotional. And so each one of those stressors will cause what's known as the fight or flight response, or sympathetic response. Okay. And I bring that up a lot when we talk about adrenals, because I think we've been so conditioned that when somebody says stress, that the first thing we think of is emotional. And yes, that's legitimate and something we definitely need to be thinking about. But it also comes from toxicities. It also comes from physical stress. And physical stress could be a trauma, like I said, like hitting your toe with a hammer, but also when you neglect your body and you allow things to degenerate, tissues become less functional. So think of that like a cavity on a tooth, or that there's a process that's taking place that's stressing tissues, and it causes inflammation. And with enough time and repetition and inflammation, those tissues start to get neglected and they start to degenerate. And so with enough cells that get degenerated, that creates enough tissue degeneration, now you have an organ that could potentially be not functioning well, right? So what happens there? Think of like things like maybe like the gallbladder or tonsils, or even ovaries and uteruses. These are very common areas that things degenerate, cells degenerate, they become dysfunctional. We have symptoms of dysfunction in those areas. And part of our medical procedures is to take those parts out when they become really degenerative. Okay. And so again, think of it like kind of like a cavity. But there's a process that's taking place that the stress on those tissues is causing degeneration. And so that's another way to describe physical stress, that tissues are being damaged, they're suboptimal, they're not what they're supposed to be. You get parts taken out, and by definition, you can't be 100% healthy if you're removing parts. And if that was the case, you just take them all out, right? So that's what physical stress means. But then, therefore, like think about this: you take out tonsils, you take out a gallbladder. Now, this is a permanent and irreversible stress onto your body, right? Your body has to compensate it for the rest of your life. And so that could be leading to adrenal dysfunction. So see, that's the depth of understanding these things. Is it's not just the superficial, it's not just the obvious, it's not just the most tangible things that you can think of and remember and see and feel. It's the history and the compiling of, think of like a bucket that's filling up, and you got to look at this whole spectrum. Okay, so anyways, come back around to that, these physical, chemical, and emotional stressors, what they do is they do create the fight or flight sympathetic response. Now, what that is like, I like to compare it to is like if you're getting chased by a bear. Let's just like, that's what it is. It's like your body's literally trying to escape from a scenario. And in that situation, do your hormones change? Do your adrenals change? Does your body mechanisms change if you're getting chased by a bear? Yes, because there's priorities and then there's things that aren't priorities. Now, what do I mean by that is like, if you're getting chased by a bear, what's the priority? To get away. So what do you need for that? You need more heart work. You need more respiration, more breathing. You need your muscles to work good so you can run out of there. You need more oxygen, right? You got to get away from the situation. Now, what this brings up is that in that situation, if you're getting chased by a bear, it doesn't matter. I always say it doesn't matter if you're going to digest food, if you're going to be the food, right? It also doesn't matter if you're going to reproduce, if you're going to be food. Okay, so in this fight or flight response, two big mechanisms to become aware of is that it shuts down your gut, and your gut is a huge part of your immune system. And so physical, chemical, and emotional stressors suppress your immune system function and your gut function on purpose, right? Because it's not important to digest food. It's not important to have a strong immune system. And it's not important to reproduce if you're getting chased by a bear. It's not a healthy scenario in time for that. You got to get away from the situation. And when it comes to hormones, this is a topic I come up with a lot, is that, what's the primary purpose of having sex hormones? Now, what's the sex hormones? Progesterone, testosterone, estrogens. Okay. It's not an important time to reproduce. And those are the sex hormones, right? Like, and that's the main purpose. You have those hormones. And so if you're getting chased by a bear, you're in fight or flight sympathetic response, your hormones are going to change. And so when you go to docs, you go to endocrinologists and you're getting hormone replacement therapies or getting told that you need them, what you got to start to understand is that these hormone changes are most commonly caused by something else that's creating a fight or flight response. Okay, so that's some wisdom right there. Right there. So what you can also learn from the bear analogy is that if you're continually getting chased, I mean, initially you could do good if it was a short sprint. But if that bear continues to chase you and you're not getting away from it, what do you start to do? You start to fatigue a little bit. If that bear continues to chase you and you're not getting away, you get to exhaustion. And then unfortunately, that bear catches up with you and eats you. And I think that's a good way to remember stages of how your body is adapting. And that's definitely what we want to talk about here with the adrenals, is that there's stages of adaptation. So let's talk about that. So there's three stages of adaptation in the body, and definitely with the adrenals. Is that the first phase is this arousal alarm? Hey, you're seeing that you got a bear, there's a bear chasing you. And so you go into this alarm phase adaptation where you've got to get away from that. And so two hormones that go up with that is the cortisol and the DHEA. So they raise up, and that's what stage one adrenal function looks like. So when I do lab testing, it's like, okay, but we have cortisol and DHEA, they're elevated. We know that we have these triggers over here. Here's what we need to do with that. And what's I'm going to help with today too is showing you some different symptoms so you can maybe start to narrow down, even from a symptom standpoint. Am I like stage one adrenal? Am I stage three adrenal? And start to get an idea there. But I am not a guesser. I'm always testing. I don't. There's too much like cross symptomatology, like where it could be this, it could be that, and I'm like, well, stop the could be's, just test it, and test it completely, and then you figure it out, and then there's no more guesswork, and so much time and money and effort is taking place for people on guessing, and because based off of symptoms, and they just don't know that there's this testing out there that can just be like, you know what's the nuts and bolts of this? Let's stop guessing, get after it. But anyways, in that first phase, that arousal phase, when it comes to the adrenals, your cortisol and your DHEA is going up. Phase two is called resistance phase, where you're in that adaptation, where the bear has been chasing you for a little while and you're starting to fatigue out a little bit. So you're on the downward slide. One of the typical presentations I see with that is that the cortisol is still up and the DHEA is starting to. This is the tricky part: is it going to be within normal limits? And so it seems like it's normal, but it's actually on a downhill slide. And so this is where you got to compare. Have you addressed the triggers that could be affecting these adrenals? And if you have, or you haven't, then you've got to assume that they're on the downhill slide. Okay, so that's phase two adaptation. It's called early decompensation as well. And so we got phase one, phase two, and now phase three is often where you hear commonly called adrenal fatigue. Now, technically, there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. It's where this hypothalamus pituitary axis becomes fatigued or disrupted. Okay, and that includes many different parts of your body. So these cells, these tissues become dysfunctional. And so it's the accumulation of all of this axis of communication is affected. And so it's not really fatigue where the adrenals are just kind of like burnt out. Like it's the whole system is tired from running from the bear. Okay. And so it's known as resistance, resistance exhaustion phase, late compensation phase. So this is where you have adrenal insufficiency. So you're gonna have low cortisol, low DHEA, and that's one of the testing clinical presentations of that. So through testing you can determine that, and then what that helps is it helps to determine, because of that, the chronicity, like okay, this has been a long-term stress. What are those things that have been stressing you? And unfortunately, I see a lot of this is that you get early. There's a lot of people who've had early like physical, emotional traumas in their life with child abuse, and that sets the stage later on for these issues. That's a very common one actually. But then I'll go over some of these other things that are triggering it here in a minute. But once you get to this adrenal insufficiency thing, you're really, your body's really fatigued out and dysfunctional, and it has a ripple effect. Definitely your sex hormones, your gut, they're all your immune system, they're all crossing over with one another. Think of like ripples in a pond where you just dropped a lot of rocks in there. So there's a lot of ripples happening. And this is why you have to have a comprehensive approach from functional medicine that you understand the systems of the body and not just chasing symptoms. Like it's okay to be like in some ways to be managing and treating some of these symptoms of adrenal dysfunction or just complete dysfunction of your body, but at the same time you need to be addressing the root causes. You don't just mask symptoms. Understand the root causes and address them and manage the symptoms as you go along with that. And there's a lot of art to that, and that's been something that I've been blessed to figure out because of I had to go through things too. I mean, I was disabled at 19 years old, and then my wife got very sick with a mold toxicity, and that's what led me to functional medicine. So come back around here again, guys, is that there's three phases of adrenal dysfunction: phase one, phase two, phase three. Phase one is arousal, getting chased by a bear, just started. Phase two, you've been running from the bear for a little bit and you're starting to fatigue. Phase three, that you've been getting chased by that bear for a longer period of time and you've ran out of gas, and that bear catches up with you and eats you, right? So that's my little keep it fun, right? Around that. It's not fun to be dealing with these things, but hopefully that helps you understand. So when we look at signs and symptoms, let's concentrate on phase one and phase three, okay? Because phase two is a little more difficult to decipher from a symptom standpoint, okay? So when we're looking at phase one, that arousal, that alarm phase, here's some of the common symptoms that you can start to look at and say, man, I have that. Well, I could probably say that I'm in phase one, and one of those is irritable bowel syndrome in a way of constipation. Okay. Now, think about this again. What I said, if you're getting chased by air, you don't need to digest food if you're going to be the food. So it actually shuts down digestion. And so people can be constipated. Now, what does constipated mean is really you should be having at the bare minimum one bowel movement per day, but 2 to 3 is optimal. Okay. So if you're not having a bowel movement every day, or unfortunately you're skipping multiple days in between bowel movements, one of the record, I think the record I have with one of my patients was 28 days in between bowel movements. Like that's a problem. But the thing is that I have people like, I've always done that. I only have a bowel movement like 3 times a week, but that's normal for me. Well, it might be normal in your world, but if you listen to it, if you listen to that, it may not, you may not have a bunch of gut issues. You may not have a bunch of symptoms. And so that's why it feels like it's normal, but it's your body. That's a symptom of dysfunction. It's a symptom of stress response. And if you listen to that and start to address it, you don't neglect it long enough to make it become a really big problem. And so that's why I say you got to listen to the whispers and not the loud shouts, right? So irritable bowel syndrome in the form of constipation is a sign of phase one adrenal dysfunction, where everything is in alarm phase. Another symptom is insomnia. So sleep issues, whether that's problems going to sleep, staying asleep, waking up multiple times per night. There's insomnia problems happening. And so that's a big indicator of that you could be in stage one adrenal dysfunction. Chronic migraines is another one. That has a lot to do with your gut too, by the way. And then memory impairment. You see this with, I take care of a lot of type A people, and they're always trying to multitask, and there's just a lot going on. And so, they're having problems with memory. Part of it's a level of stuff that's coming at them or they're dealing with. But also, just that whole brain fog, cognitive, it's hard to be creative when you're under stress. You're just in this fight or flight response survival mechanism. In phase one, you can also see anxiety. right? So anxiety, anxious all the time. And here's a big one too: is melancholic depression. Now, what does that look like? Is it's like you're sensitive, you're sad, you're critical, you get socially withdrawn, you get loss of enjoyment in usual activities. So what does that mean? Is that there's a kind of a numbing out process that takes place with that. And then there's different ways and mechanisms that people actually cope and do mask and avoid symptoms. So it's there's a difference here because you got atypical depression, which is phase 3, and melancholic depression, which is phase 1. But this is where you got to compare some of those symptoms, but definitely get to the testing to get to the root causes. Um, but start to say like, listen, like that kind of describes me. I'm kind of like numbed out. I'm tired of dealing with the stuff that I'm dealing with. There's another big thing in that situation with melancholic depression. I mean, I hate the word depression, but just that's what they technically call it. And so you find that you don't eat as much too. Like you're just not hungry. So if you find yourself when you're like, man, I'm kind of stressed out, and you don't want to eat, that could be another sign and symptom that you're more in phase 1 adrenal dysfunction. Other things that can show up here in adrenal dysfunction phase 1 is PMS for you ladies out there, because it will definitely disrupt those hormones again. There's something called cortisol steal, where basically the building materials that you need to make your sex hormones, like progesterone, testosterone, estrogen, that those building materials, the same building materials, also help support the adrenals when they're stressed. And so, your body will use some of those building materials, and the more stressed that you are, the more that it'll use, and the less that you have to make your sex hormones. Okay. And so that can really disrupt your sex hormone mechanisms. And then also, when it comes to PMS and a lot of ladies like being estrogen dominant, I talked about being estrogen dominant last week at last week's live Q&A. So check that out if you didn't watch that. But in estrogen dominance, what happens a lot of times too is that you're having problems with detoxification of those estrogens, which has so much to do with your gut and your liver again. So it's in that fight or flight response, gut shutting down can affect your liver metabolism. Like, see, these things start to really become complicated quickly if you don't have specific comprehensive testing, and then people fail with their health all the time. And like, I don't want to see that happen. And so again, that's why I'm doing these things, like these live Q&As. Some things you can see in the phase 1 adrenal is weight loss. Actually, I see a lot of that because people aren't eating. Okay, so they kind of starving themselves, and so that's the reason why they're losing weight. Guys tend to be more on that side. They do better about losing weight in a way. And then ladies, I see you can lose weight for a while because you're not eating, but then you hit this threshold where now you start to gain weight no matter what. And so what happens with a lot of these ladies is they're already not eating a lot, or they're eating poorly. And so they kind of try to change their diet a little bit, but they still don't eat that many calories. Like let's seriously, like 500 calories per day. That's not good. And then they try to work out more. And then like if you try to go crush it in the gym and you're not eating right and your adrenals are dysfunctional, like you start, what that starts to do is stress your body in a way that affects your hormones like estrogen, and it can cause estrogen depletion. And one of the mechanisms is that your body will actually increase fat cells because fat cells help you make more estrogen. Okay. So it's a vicious cycle that really messes up ladies usually, because they're like, man, I work out all the time. I'm eating really pretty good, but I keep gaining weight. I don't know what the deal is. And so it's actually a protective mechanism in it, but it's not any fun at all. And it can be very destructive mentally, which can lead to more stress. Like it's just a vicious cycle. All right. So what are some of these other symptoms of phase 1 adrenal alarm phase? Increased blood pressure, bone demineralization. Ladies, you're always getting talked about osteoporosis, right? Suppression of your immune system. I mentioned that it decreases your immune system in your gut. Depression, and then increased blood sugar. Okay, so think about that too. Is that I have a lot of people who don't eat a lot of sugar, but then they get their blood glucose tested, and it's high. Their A1C is high. And what happens is that when your body's under stress, it wants quick energy from sugar. And so it has mechanisms that will keep blood sugar high because it's quick in available energy. Your body basically doesn't want to take the time to break down fat for energy. Just try to keep it simple right there. So you have a preference for sugar for energy, but if you allow that to happen for too long, then that causes oxidation called rusting of your arteries, which causes inflammation of your arteries, which then therefore causes atherosclerosis. Okay, that's more about blood sugar than it is about the fats. Okay, and cholesterol. Like these are the common topics that are out there, and I'll cover those things as we go along. I can just keep going and going on these things, but anyways, those are the signs and symptoms of phase one, arousal phase. So let's go to phase three. So the signs and symptoms of that exhaustive phase, that HPA axis exhaustive phase, is the number one. Think of atypical depression. Now, what does that look like? That's where you're more somnolent. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Is that you feel tired all the time. And it's not necessarily relative to sleep because you actually want to sleep more. And even you can have like great night. You're sleeping all night, but then you're still fatigued all day, right? Those are some big warning signs of adrenal exhaustion. That phase three, postpartum depression. So for ladies who they may feel okay before pregnancy, they get into pregnancy. They may find themselves sleeping more, and it's hard. It's like, hey, I'm growing a baby, right? Like it's hard to decipher. But then you get into past pregnancy and you get into this postpartum depression. Listen to those symptoms because that postpartum could also go away, but it's showing up because your body's under a big stress load with having just built a new body and a new baby, and you're working through that process. And so sometimes when your body's in those natural but stressful situations, it can expose weaknesses, and so that's something that be exposed, is that, oh man, okay, the mood and behavior is exposed. I have other ladies who go into gestational diabetes, right? So then it's like, oh my gosh, there's dysfunction happening within the pancreas, and that the diabetes, the gestational, goes away after pregnancy. But if we listen to that popped up during pregnancy, it could be an indicator that it's going to come along later on if you don't address why it's happening during pregnancy. Hopefully that didn't confuse that. But anyway, stressful, even natural stressful times in our life can expose weaknesses that are happening inside the body and so listen to those. So coming into that phase three again, you got the atypical depression, which is the feeling tired all the time, even if you can't sleep most of the time. You just cannot get that energy coming up. Seasonal affective disorder, you hear about that, when it becomes wintertime, less sunlight. People who tend to be more sensitive to that could be more in phase three adrenal dysfunction. Also panic attacks. So you see the difference between anxiety to panic attacks. And this is like an overwhelming, like a lot of times you can deal with the anxiety, but the panic attack is like a shutdown. And so that could be a determining factor. But then also chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, now you hear that label thrown out there quite often. And in some ways, I call it a junk diagnosis because they're just trying to name it something, but it's multifactorial and definitely can be connected to your adrenals. Okay, so those are the contrasts that you can start to see from a symptoms standpoint when we're thinking about the adrenals. And then, there's just a whole list of hormone-related symptoms. Again, go back to that estrogen dominance live Q&A last week. Go to my social videos and stuff. And so you'll be able to see some of those other symptoms of hormonal dysfunction and conditions and diagnoses that are going to be connected also to the adrenals. All right. So I don't take up too much time every time I do these live Q&As. But so I also mentioned that let's talk about a couple medications that you got to really watch out for when you have adrenal dysfunction. And two of the medications to really look out for, well, the classifications are the SSRIs, so the serotonin reuptake inhibitors is what that stands for, and also thyroid medications like levothyroxine Synthroid. All right, so here's the thing, is that it's especially important when you have to determine, like, this is where testing is really important, is that that way you can really see, are you phase one, are you phase three? because technically you could take an SSRI. Like here's some of those names: the fluoxetine, this I always have a citalopram. I was having a hard time with that one for whatever reason, and the sertraline. Okay, so those are very commonly prescribed SSRIs, and they can be effective if you are in phase one and you're having more of that melancholic type depression. But sometimes I just say depression is one thing, right? They're not discriminating between the melancholic or the atypical. And again, atypical depression is going to be where you're just tired all the time. You're disconnected. You just don't feel like doing anything, right? And so if you don't know that you're in phase three, these medications can really damage you. Okay, so if you're already exhausted, if your adrenals are already exhausted, the SSRIs can cause that cortisol in those adrenals to be even more insufficient. Okay, so that's very important to understand, and that you got to have these conversations with the doctor who puts you on these medications. Because again, like when I'm doing a live video or I'm doing something on social media, I am not your doctor, right? Like this is information purposes, and you need more clinical evidence and connection with your doc. And so if you want me to be your doctor, you just got to connect with me and we can make that happen. But until then, this is still just informational, right? There's like the cover my rear end thing, right? So whatever. But anyways, coming back to the drugs, you got to watch out for the SSRIs, especially if you're in adrenal phase three. And then also the thyroid medications. And this is hard because, adrenals and thyroid, they have a lot of the same symptoms along with the sex hormones. And so a lot of times people are getting put on medications for thyroid. And if you are in phase three adrenal dysfunction, levothyroxine and synthroid, even like you look on the side effects in the box, the major side effects, it will say, do not take this if you have, clinical adrenal insufficiency, underlying adrenal insufficiency. And so the thing is what's the threshold of adrenal insufficiency? What's the definition of that? And medically, they're looking for if you have other diagnoses. Okay, and so if you don't have that diagnosis, then they're not going to say that you're not clinically insufficient yet. But can you be clinically insufficient before a diagnosis? Yes, because you may not have even been to a doctor yet, right? So it's like you got to be careful there. And and you can find this type of information, the Levo, the Synthroid, it comes from National Institute of Health. There's plenty of papers and research about these things. And so if you are on Levo or Synthroid and you're having problems and I'm describing you here today, you've got to talk to your doctor who puts you onto that. And then you got to get more specific testing, because again, thyroid testing is very notorious for being incomplete. They're usually just testing TSH and maybe T4 and T3. That's not a complete comprehensive thyroid panel. And then you got to also understand that the adrenals are affecting the thyroid. So there's a lot of detail there that's usually being missed, but I want you to become aware of that. If you are using the SSRIs and or you're using the levothyroxine, that if you're having these type of symptoms and adrenal problems, that they may be a contributing factor. So you can start to address that. Now, from there, let's talk about some other common causes of adrenal issues: HPA axis dysfunction, trauma, early child abuse. I mentioned that before. And then we get into some gut things like food allergies and food sensitivities. Again, I've done videos on that. Check them out. Gut dysbiosis. So your gut, your microbiome, it's a huge part of your immune system. About 80% of the cells that work within your immune system are found within your gut. Okay, so think gut, think immune system, and having dysfunction within your gut microbiome is a huge factor of stress on your body from a physical, chemical, and emotional standpoint, actually. So, 90% of your serotonin is actually being made in your gut. And so that's another common topic around mood and behavior and depression and anxiety is serotonin. So anyways, the gut is a big producer of that. External toxins that you get exposed to. Now, there's a ton of these from, I think of high fructose corn syrup, artificial sweeteners, hydrogenated oils, the packaged products, like it's all the packaged processed foods out there. Those are big problems and they put a lot of stress onto our body, but we think of it just as nutrition and bad foods. We don't think of it as stress and adrenal dysfunction, which leads to hormone dysfunction and gut dysfunction and all of these connection points. And so it has a much bigger impact and should be taken very much more seriously. Other very common toxins that people get exposed to are plastics like BPA, and these are xenoestrogens. They can mimic estrogens in the body and cause hormone dysfunction and then stress on the body as well, right? So, and detoxification issues. You get into also some bigger toxins like heavy metals, mold toxicity, like my wife. That's more common than you think, guys. And then also, another big one you hear about is tick bites, like with Lyme's as well. And so, there's many different factors there. I think another big one to put on your radar is glyphosate, which is the herbicide that they use on crops, on our foods, genetically modified crops for sure. And then even some of the conventional crops out there. So you got to watch out for that. And then also the other pharmaceuticals. Remember, drugs can save lives. The pharmaceutical medications, they can save lives for sure in the right times, but they do not address the root causes of problems. And so they do put more stress on your body. So you've got to be careful about that. And then you also have to have a goal of minimizing and reducing those as much as possible. And then if you can, get out of using them. Okay. And that takes work with the doc who puts you on them. And in congruency with finding out root causes and addressing those root causes. And then that way you can taper off of medications and get rid of them very safely and effectively. And you just need support with that. Just be very detailed. And that's, again, I love testing because it helps me get to the details. So be careful with the other pharmaceuticals, and don't just mask symptoms. So from there, let's talk about some lifestyle changes that we can make. Okay, so we've got to remove the known stressors in our life, and sometimes it's not so easy because it's work, it's relationships, it's financial situations, and it's not easy to manage in the moment. People can't quit their jobs. Like I take care of a lot of nurses, and I always think about them because they've invested a lot of time and effort to become that nurse, and they love their job in so many ways. And to quit that, it's like it goes against their life purpose, right? So it's tough situation. So how do we manage that? How do we work around it? How do we address that? Okay, we're going to continue to be stressed. So how do we optimize our body to deal with it? And again, testing is very important for that. So sometimes we can't get out of those situations, but then there's other things that we can. And the first thing that I think of is the news. The news is all about putting people into a state of fight or flight. Okay, it's shock media. I think we've really come to know that over the last few years, and so don't watch the news. I just say rip the band-aid off. Don't watch that stuff. Don't put that stuff into your head. That's something that you can easily do that will help. Okay, I always think of too. Don't mask and avoid and cope with the stress in your life with negative behaviors. What are the most common ones? Alcohol, drugs. What's the most used drug? Food, okay? And usually sugary foods, right? Something that puts us into, like it gives you a dopamine dump, which can help you to feel better for a little bit of time, but then has a negative side effect on the back end of that for sure, right? So you got to be very careful with those, and you got to ask yourself, am I masking my problems, and why am I avoiding them? And that's huge. There's some personal development that must take place here. Okay, so don't mask with drugs and alcohol and food. And alcohol, you don't get away with this stuff. Okay, even just a little bit, and my doctor said that just a little bit of wine is okay. No, it's still alcohol. It's toxic. You get intoxicated. That's toxins, okay? Has a big time effect on your hormones, big time. That's why I'm emphasizing this so much, okay? So be very careful there. All right, next thing is, another way to address underlying issues is if you really need it, get some counseling, okay? Like there's great counselors out there. And having that support is worth it, okay? Address your root causes. You have to. And then here's some ways to manage stress too. So address these root causes. Don't put them under the table, sweep them underneath the rug. Don't mask them. Address them. Here's some great healthy ways to address meditation, which is easy, can be as easy as breathing, guys. Breathing in your nose and out your mouth, right? There is a ton of great apps out there. Look into it, Google it, okay? Even prayer, wherever your spiritual path is, understanding and maybe surrendering to a higher power, right? And having some time for reflection and thinking about what's happening right now, because that's another very easy topic of like a lot of anxiety comes from what we think is going to happen into the future, and then a lot of depression comes from what's happened in the past, neither of which you can't do anything about. What's happened, the future hasn't happened yet, and so like that's where you hear like 80% of the things that you worry about don't ever happen, right? So be in that present moment, and prayer can definitely help you to do that, and breathing definitely does. Okay, so if you have a sensitivity to the thing around prayer or even religion or something, just breathe. Okay, and there's tons of apps for that. And then next thing is movement and exercise, and I think that that's another form of meditation. That's one of my favorite forms of meditation. Is emotion comes from motion. Tony Robbins, a huge personal development guy out there for many years. That's where I got that from. But emotion comes from motion, and so getting your body moving does release different hormones. And it's not like again getting chased by a bear where it's an extreme exercise. It's more of like just get moving, walk around. And then what I like is connecting that with nature. And so I love to go on hikes. I live in Western Colorado, which is awesome for hiking and biking and stuff. And so it gives me a chance to connect with nature, and it's definitely how I decompress when I feel, well, not just when I feel stressed, but it's something that I have rituals and habits around, and you just connect with nature with some movement. It's great. It's wonderful things. Engage and participate in activities that feed you. That's what I think I'm blessed with, is that doing this today, it feeds me. Like talking about these things, I get. It's part of who I am, and I'm very passionate about. And so this helps me to decrease my adrenal load. And so thank you for participating with me today. But participate in things that you really love and enjoy, and hopefully that could be things like exercise too. But some people, they like gardening, they like knitting, like they're very like not extreme activities, but it's what soothes them, right? And it's healthy. It's not masking with alcohol and drugs, right? Or even food and unhealthy food. So participate in those healthy behaviors. Be connect with the people that you love and care about, right? Like get connected, and that's a huge one too. Okay, you got to make sleep a priority. And I know that if you're in phase 1 adrenals, that your sleep patterns can be really off. And that's where you can look at a lot of different things around sleep, where, don't be eating right before you go to bed. Definitely stay away from stimulants like caffeine and from coffee even. Okay. You got to be careful of decaffeinated too, because there's a lot of chemicals that happen there. If you have questions and anything that I'm going over today, just, comment, direct message me. You can also email me at info@drgunyon.com. But anyways, there's a lot of sleep habits, but make it a priority. Get away, dim the lights, get away from technology at least an hour away, before you go to bed. Don't, read stuff that's really, it makes you think a lot. It's got to be more of a soothing time before you go to bed. If you're really struggling with the sleep, make it a huge priority. You got to stay away from the standard American diet. Oh my gosh, they call it's SAD as an acronym, SAD. And what does that mean? It's a lot of refined carbohydrates. So it's a lot of processed foods, boxes and bags. Eat real food and eat organic. Okay. There is a difference there. Avoiding chemicals is a big part of that. Eat good fats, guys. Fats are great for you. You just have to discriminate between good and bad fats. What are good fats? Good saturated fats, coconut oil. Okay. Other mono and polyunsaturated fats, things like avocados, so avocado oil, olives, you hear about that, nuts and seeds. And there are different, you got to be careful with those about cooking with them. You don't want them to be roasted when it comes to nuts and seeds. You want them to be raw, but it's okay to get a bunch of fat. You need fat. You need good lean protein, and that can even come from red meat. Okay, beef can be totally fine, but it needs to be 100% grass-fed, no antibiotics, no hormones. I mean, so there are some stipulations, but what is everybody else eating? Is all this packaged in bags and fast food and high sugar, lots of alcohol, limited water, lots of sodas, energy drinks, coffee, caffeine, like it's the standard American diet that that's a big stressor on our body. So you got to get away from that. Again, look, watch some of my other videos to get more details. And then I think a huge one that a lot of people are unaware of is complete advanced functional medicine testing for each individual, because that's the thing, is that none of us are exactly the same. We have relatively the same parts. And I say relatively because I know we have men and women out there, right? So I do not have a uterus. I don't have ovaries, right? So with that said, we have unique situations. We all have lived different lives. We've been exposed to different things. We've had different stressors. I had back surgery at 19 years old, like all of these different things, different antibiotics and medications that have come along. All of this is part of your history that's brought to you to where you are right now. And so it takes very complete, exact testing for you to determine what you need to do, not me, right? And so that's a huge lifestyle change that we need to make, is understanding that functional medicine should be for complete advanced functional medicine testing, and build your health off of the specifics, not the generalities, on just how you look and how you feel. Use the how you look and how you feel to motivate you and say, listen, I am not going to do this anymore. I have to change my life, and understand these things that I'm teaching you so you could get on the right path and not waste time, money, and effort doing general stuff that leads to dead ends. Okay. So those are some lifestyle things that I would say that you can come back and review and watch this video again, and you can write these things down if you're not already. So quick review here, guys, is that what have we talked about is that we're talking about adrenals and how they get triggered by physical, chemical, emotional stressors. There's 3 stages of adrenal dysfunction. Phase 1 is alarm. Phase 2 is where you're starting to fade. Phase 3 is where they're basically, the HPA axis, the stress response is exhausted. Okay, but it still can be corrected. Okay, so that's where I don't want you to think it's totally burnt out and you can't do anything about it. So 3 phases of adrenal dysfunction. We talked about some signs and symptoms of definitely phase 1, where that's more of fight or flight, and things are like your gut are shutting down. You can have constipation, insomnia, anxiety, melancholic, depression, PMS. You can have a lot of blood sugar dysregulation issues, immune system issues. Phase 3, you can have just a ton of fatigue. You can sleep all day, you can sleep all night, you just can't get enough sleep. Postpartum depression, panic attacks, chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Seasonal depression disorder or affective disorder. So those are some of the discriminating characteristics that you could say are the adrenals. A couple of medication classifications to really avoid or be sensitive to and aware of are the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, especially if you're in phase 3, because they can cause you to become even lower phase 3. And the same thing for the thyroid medications like Levo and Synthroid. They can cause more depression of the adrenal function. Okay, so be careful of those and talk to your doctors about that if you are on those medications. And then, we talked about other causes of adrenal dysfunction, from trauma, early child abuse, food problems, gut dysfunction, external toxins, internal toxins, which I actually didn't say, with infections that can happen in your gut, and that's a big one that's missed a lot too. And so those are some of the other causes that you can start to look at, and then the different lifestyle changes that I mentioned here just at the end. So with that said, that's the summary there of what we talked about today. Remember, I'm doing these live Q&As every week on Wednesdays. I really like this 8 a.m. time here, Mountain Standard Time. Works pretty well. I think there's more people who are available for that type of time too. So that's good. If you do have questions that you would like me to use in upcoming Q&As, let me know. Email me at info@drgunyon.com. You can direct message me, do comments in the different sections here. Also, what happens too is I have a couple different things that you can engage into. I actually have an e-guide, And if you go on my Instagram link in my bio, you can get the free e-guide for gut health, which is important for these adrenals and the hormones for sure, because it's your immune system. And then also I am doing what I call my Road to Wellness Masterclass. And I do that about every other week. And what that is a live webinar. And so I go into more depth about all of this, right? So it's like, what is health and how do we approach it? And what are all the perspectives around this? And what are people doing and not doing? And how do we change this? And that's really what it is. It's a training to help you become your own doctor and get more perspective based off of facts and laws and principles about your body. And definitely understanding functional medicine as well, and more about functional medicine testing. But it is more about just the overall becoming your own doctor. So I do that periodically. And so I am actually having one tomorrow night, Wednesday, or actually 2 nights. Geez, 2 nights. It's tonight. Jeez, it's tonight at 6 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. But there's a link in my bio that you can go in there and actually register for the class, and then we'll do that tonight. And so those are some options for you. Just let me know if you need anything, and if anything, I'll hopefully see you guys next Wednesday again for the live Q&A, and I will be letting everybody know what the topics will be going into next week. All right, everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.